Hi, I'm Rick Christofferson. Today I'd like to tell you about your new TS55 or TS75 guided saw. I'll show you how to set up and use your new saw, as well as explain some of the optional accessories that you may have. Let's talk about the controls and features of your saw, and I'll go through each one of these in greater detail a little bit later on. To start with, we have the power trigger, the trigger release, speed control dial, plug-it power port, dust collection port, bevel adjustment lock on the rear, and a second one on the front. On the back of the saw, there are two guide rail gib adjustment knobs, as well as the depth stop. On the front of the saw, there is a removable outrigger splinter guard. Separate from the saw is a backstop that attaches to your guide rail. For changing blades, there is the fast fix lever, and the blade wrench storage compartment is in the handle. Now the difference between a TS55 and a TS75 is that the blade wrench is stored in the base, and that there's also a storage location in the base for the backstop. Before you use your saw for the first time, there's some things that you'll want to check and become familiar with, as well as a few adjustments that need to be made. First thing that you need to do is adjust your saw to fit your guide rail. We do that using the two guide rail adjustment knobs on the back of the saw. With the saw placed on the guide rail, wiggle it and see if it feels loose. If it is loose, tighten the guide rail adjustment knobs until it no longer wiggles, but also make sure that it slides freely. If it doesn't slide freely, you've tightened them too much, and if it still wiggles, you haven't tightened them enough. Now that you have your saw adjusted to your guide rail, it's time to trim your guide rail's splinter guard to match your saw. Now the splinter guard is a sacrificial plastic edge on the front of the guide rail that the saw blade cuts against for chip-free cutting. Some users might be a little intimidated about cutting their splinter guard because it's the first time they've used their saw and they're actually cutting part of the tool that they bought. It's not that difficult, and I'd like to show you how to do it. Now the next thing we need to do to prepare our saw is to set the depth of cut. To set our depth of cut, press in on the depth stop, sliding it to the position that we need and releasing it until it clicks. For cutting your splinter guard, you want your depth of cut to be 10 millimeters. The next step after that is to connect your plug-it cord into the back of the tool. To install the plug-it cord on your saw, you may find it easier to bevel the saw up a little bit, align the slot in the cord with the tab and the receptacle, push it together, and then rotate the outer sleeve a full quarter turn until you feel it lock into place. If the cord is not fully locked into the saw, you can damage the saw and damage the cord. For cutting your splinter guard, the speed of the saw isn't critical, but you may find that a speed between 3 and 4 works best. Before cutting your splinter guard, you want to become familiar with the power controls on your saw. To turn the saw on, push up on the trigger release and pull back on the trigger. You may notice a slight growling sound from the saw. That's normal operation, and it's due to the electronic speed control of the motor interacting with the mechanics of the saw. Okay, you're ready to cut your splinter guard. You can set your guide rail up on the edge of a table like this, or you can set it in the middle of another work surface that you're able to cut into. I'm going to cut mine on top of the MFT table so that you can see what I'm doing. You want to begin your cut with the rear guide rail adjustment knob at the edge of the guide rail, and you want to end your cut with the front guide rail adjustment knob at the front end of the rail. Now this will leave a little bit of splinter guard uncut at either end, and if you wish, you may trim that off, but it's not necessary. Just understand, once the guide rail knob gets past the guide rail, the saw will no longer fit tight. Now you can minimize this by biasing the saw away from the splinter guard at the beginning and end of your cut. Set up, we'll plug our saw back in, connect the vac. So let's talk about saw blades. The TS75 comes with a combination blade, and the TS55 comes with a fine-tooth cross-cut blade. You may need to change your blade depending on the type of cut that you're going to make, and Festool offers a wide variety of blades ranging from metal cutting to ripping. You may also need to change your blade if it simply becomes dull over time. I'd like to use the TS55 to show you how to change your blade. Now the first thing you need to do when changing your blade is to set your depth stop at least below 30 millimeters. Raise your fast fix lever, press up on the trigger release, and then plunge the saw down until it clicks. This locks the blade in the down position and also stops it from rotating. Remove the wrench from the handle and loosen the arbor bolt in a normal counterclockwise direction. Remove the arbor bolt and the arbor flange. If you do happen to drop your arbor flange down between the blade and the guard, the easiest thing to do is take out the blade and the arbor flange will fall out afterward. To remove the blade, lift it off the arbor and slide it out underneath the riving knife. Your new blade will have a light coating of a rust-preventive oil. It is not necessary to clean this off, but if you wish to do so, mineral spirits works well. I have a paper towel moistened with mineral spirits to wipe the blade down. The coating is very light and wipes off easily. And when you insert the blade back into the saw, make sure that the label is facing outward. Slide it in under the riving knife and up over the arbor. Replace the arbor flange. And the arbor bolt. Now it's not necessary to crank this down really tight, just snug it up. Replace your wrench in the handle. Now when releasing your fast fix lever, hold down on the saw a little bit so it doesn't jump all the way back to zero, and release it slowly. Your saw is now ready to cut. Now that we have our saw set up, it's time to talk about some basic principles for using it. Guide rails come in a variety of lengths. We need to make sure that the one we're using is long enough for the cut we want to make. So we need to have enough guide rail ahead of the workpiece to support the saw so that you can plunge this blade down before you begin your cut. At the end of the cut, we need to make sure there's enough guide rail to support the saw until the center of the blade exits the workpiece. To set your depth of cut, a simple trick is with the saw unplugged, lower the blade until it touches the table, and then raise your depth stop to be 2 to 3 millimeters below that setting, and you'll have the perfect depth for the cut. To make your cut, first start the saw, then plunge down to your depth setting, and advance into the workpiece slowly. Now sometimes you need to make a cut that's longer than your guide rail. To do this, we use 2 guide rails and the guide rail connecting bars. To use the bars, insert them into the T-slots of the guide rail, making sure that the screws are pointing up on the upper T-slot and are pointing down on the lower T-slot. Slide your other guide rail over the bars, butt them together, and then you want to use a straight edge to make sure that it's nice and straight before tightening down your screws. Tighten the screws until they are just snug. Over tightening the screws may damage your guide rail. Verify that the connection is straight and you're ready to cut. Now another type of cut that you may need to make is a plunge cut. A plunge cut is one that starts and stops inside the workpiece. I've added some blue painter's tape where I want my cut to start and another piece where I want my cut to stop. Your saw also has markings on it to indicate the rear blade position and front blade position when the saw blade is at maximum depth. We'll use these marks along with our painter's tape to tell us when to start and stop our cut. We want to start our cut with the rear mark over the blue tape. We want to stop our cut when the front mark is over the second painter's tape. Because the right-hand side of our cut is a finished surface and we don't want any chipping on this material, we're going to use the outrigger splinter guard. To install the splinter guard onto your saw, slide it over the blade housing, insert the thumb screw, press down on the splinter guard until it touches the workpiece, and then finish tightening the screw. The outrigger splinter guard also has a mark to indicate the front of the blade. We use this mark with the blue tape to tell us when to stop our cut. Now, anytime you're making a plunge cut, you want to make sure to be using the backstop that comes with your saw. It not only controls the position of the saw, it also prevents the saw from lifting up, which reduces the chance for kickback. To set the position of your backstop, slide the saw to the position where you want to begin your cut. Slide the backstop up to the back of the saw and tighten down the thumb screw. For plunge cuts, you want your blade depth set to maximum. To make your cut, plunge in slowly all the way down and advance forward until you reach the end. In this video, we've seen how to set up a new TS55 or 75 saw, how to use the guide rail system, and how to make basic cuts. I hope you found this information helpful. Thanks for watching.